everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer Podcast. I am your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And, today we are... I had a thing and then my notes went away. I'm leaving that in. The best thing about playing games like Warhammer, and honestly, I would say even most miniature games, so obviously like war games that have sprues, and then also all the various hobbies, because most hobbies, like building model hobbies, all use sprues, is kind of the creativity of the process, right? You get to it, there's all the various things that you can do with or without the instruction booklet, right?
Sometimes when you're building your Legos, you decide you want to color outside the lines a little bit.
Exactly. Legos even great example of such creativity, like the dude that made the that's not, it wasn't Legos. The thing I was about to joke about wasn't Legos.
The dude that made Mega Bloks.
The dude that made Mega Bloks.
And was like, I'm going to make Legos.
Man, remember
but it won't be
Connects?
Legos. Of course I do.
That was not only creativity, but that was
them.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was not just creativity. That was like teaching kids to be engineers.
That was proto-STEM.
Yeah, that went deep. But the thing is, largely we've up to this point generally talked about more like taking the standard versions of models, and then the main customizations we've talked about have either been like getting 3D printed like whole models, especially. We've kind of talked about bits a little bit, but not a lot, and custom paint schemes, right? Like, we made our own Space Marine faction, chapter, which we will do the Chaos Space Marine chapter in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And, we could, honestly, you could make a custom of anything in 40K. You just need to be armed with a little bit. All you need to do is be armed with a little bit of lore, and you're on your way.
Some elbow grease.
But what's important as we kind of talked about when we made our Space Marine chapter, is it's not just the paint job. There's other aspects, right? There's things to add, to change. For example, we talked about how we wanted kind of our Space Marines to essentially have like scarves on a lot of them, kind of, instead of being like cloaked, it's more like a scarf.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I was gonna say very much like, and I was like, oh no, I don't remember his name. The Capcom game.
You talking about Sagat from Street Fighter?
No, the actual Capcom game though, where you're the ninja guy. And it's the side scroller.
Strider?
Was it Strider? Yeah.
It depends. I mean, it could be multiple things. It could be Strider. It could be,
I hate how I searched for Strider. It was Strider, first of all, but I hate that when I searched just the word Strider,
I'm too good
I got
at this.
a bike. I got
the
Strider bikes.
Yeah.
It should be the video game character, damn it.
Strider, hear you.
Yeah.
From the hit game series Strider.
Yes. I remember I always looked at him as like the that scarf look, being like, that's sick.
See, that's where I get confused. You were saying scarf, and for some reason I was thinking of scar. That's why I said Sagat at first.
Oh yeah, no. I was saying, I don't think we didn't make Scar as any specific part of the chapter's identity. But like, that's the thing, is, so like if you wanted to add that thing, right, to your to your chapter, right, you would need to start thinking outside the box, or outside the lines, as you mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to kind of take that deeper dive into Kitbashing. I was going to say, because even, this is a thing in Gundam as well. And so we'll kind of talk about it from a general sense. And this will be, I think, honestly, something that will apply to really all hobbies. While I think a lot of my references will obviously be very Warhammer centric. There is any hobby, whether it's like, especially like Trench Crusade, Warhammer, Gunpla. I don't remember. I think Star Wars Legion.
Any hobby that has model kits really has a history of people deciding to do kit bashing with it. It even happens with model planes and model cars.
Because especially with cars, you can do you can get body kit extras, so you can make it look like the Fast and Furious version of X car.
Mm-hmm.
There's
take a 1970s Bronco and slap a spoiler on it.
Yeah, exactly. Painted white. Pretty much, while I will make certain notes, this is honestly something that you could apply to any hobby you do. We're just obviously going to have our own frames of reference for what we've known and seen between our hobbies.
Yeah. What we're familiar with.
Exactly. So
should we define what kit bashing is, or attempt to define it?
Yeah, I have a very personally loose definition, right? I look at kit bashing as mainly centered around, if to me, because I know there's the kit bashing part, but with the advent of 3D printers, I think now I just definitely look at it as, as long as you are, it is the process of taking a model, whatever it may be, and then applying new parts, different parts, or extra parts from something that either be 3D printed or from a different kit, right? And it's specifically about the parts, because obviously you can paint something whatever you want, but that doesn't make it a kit bash. Well, the part that matters is the bits or the pieces or an arm or a leg or whatever.
Yes, and that is kind of how I define it on my end as well, because it's something that can get confused with customization. Mm-hmm. Customization is taking a model and making changes to it, adding effects to it, adding paint to it, modifying it in that way. But it's still largely that same model. And then, kit bashing, you're taking a model and then you are adding or replacing parts from another model to try to create something entirely new, an entirely new third thing.
Yeah, and this, like I said, and this has range, right? It's not, because even, you could look at it as all I did was take, for a Space Marine, right? This is Space Marines are a great example. And I imagine, honestly, the quote-unquote, Gundam models, or even honestly a lot of Zaku models probably are face similar things, where a lot of people will be will do a kit bash and it still inherently mostly looks like a Space Marine or a Gundam or a Zaku, but you have added non-normal pieces of, say, that kit. So a good example is one that I'll definitely have in the B-roll is a Space Marine that I have as a mix of 3D printed parts and bits from a different Space Marine kit, right? So one that I think I'm guessing it comes from some type of sniper, then adding that to legs and that I've 3D print legs and an arm that I've 3D printed. Actually, even the other arm is a half and half. It's half the standard plastic arm that comes from a Space Marine, but then connected to another portion of a 3D printed arm so that the position is different. And then it has this normal Space Marine head, so it's it's a split between being GW plastic and 3D printed resin.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of Zaku end up having a very similar look, right? Especially the green kind of grunt Zaku have that base, the kind of almost like ventilator helmet, the mono eye, and the kind of big, round, bulky arms and legs. And you might then say, like, take bits from one Char kit, from another Char kit, and then from the base Zaku kit, and it'll still generally look like a Zaku, but it will have all these things that make it where it's like, no, that's not normal. That's not on any box, And that's still a kit bash, even though it looks like a Zaku. It doesn't have to, like, your kit bash doesn't have to be like, this has never existed before.
Yeah.
Like it's
yeah. When I'm saying that you're taking pieces from one kit and adding them to another kit to create something new, that doesn't necessarily mean that like it has to be utterly like it's a Ship of Theseus type thing where it's
right.
You don't have to replace every single part of the ship. It's about making enough replacements for it to stand out from the other two models that it was based off of before. Like you could still do a kit bash where the pieces of it are extremely recognizable. Like you can immediately pick out like, okay, this is from this model kit, this is from this model kit. It's just about like making adjustments and adding in new parts to make something that wouldn't recognizably be sold as like its own model kit to begin with.
Exactly. And that's like, because that's where the creativity comes from, right? It's as long as you kind of look at it and you're like, this isn't on a box, then, but obviously it's like it's to where you want it to be, then like you've successfully kit bashed. And sometimes that honestly is just as simple as like swapping a head, and if that's because if that's what you got to do to like get your feet wet, then that's what you got to do. Like that's the fun part about hobbying is that there's not like any specific like you must meet this parameter to be qualified as this hobby thing. Like it's just you are making it what you make it, because creativity is what makes this hobby what it is. Any of these hobbies what they are.
I have an example that I'd like to show the class.
Sure.
So I'm going to drop something into our Discord conversation here. So you can show that to everyone either here or in the edit afterwards. But this is a really good example of like most people would consider this a quote unquote like more weird kit bash or like a more
quote unquote abomination.
Out of normal. Yeah. But it's something where when you look at it, if you're somebody who's been using model kits for quite a while, you can see that like this is essentially no more than like 2 or 3 models. And it's using most of one model to begin with and then just sort of incorporating the ball, parts from the ball into the main torso and some of the back pieces there.
Side note,
you're not doing
you're
not doing a lot of major changes here. Mm-hmm. You're just making something that clearly would never be sold in a box otherwise.
Right. As a side note, I love the silhouette that comes out of the ball.
It's a great silhouette. Absolutely.
It's so funny. Because it's just, anytime you look at ball, you're just like, whoever's in that ball, they're dead. They're going to die. It's like being the red shirt. It's like being the red shirt in a Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like you're not long for this world. But yeah, so I mean, you're right. I mean, you're 100% right. Like, this. It doesn't matter if somebody were to look at this and be like, "That's not an impressive kit bash." What matters is that you're starting to think, right? Mm-hmm. Because like that's where it's like that level of like, people get discouraged from art class because they're not good. If the assignment is to draw Garfield, but they're not good at drawing Garfield, so they, but they paint, they draw this just kind of like weird amalgamation of shapes and they colored it then just so that it looks vaguely like Garfield. And then the teacher kind of says like, well, you're not using this technique here, this technique there, this is it, like, and then they get a bad grade, and then that person ends up looking at then every form of artwork they do in that frame of, well, it has to have this, it has to have that, I can't do it, I'm bad at it, and then they give up. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that you need to, that's the thing to avoid, right? Like, that's to look away from, is like, hey, like, this isn't about whether or not what you've made is like super beautiful,
Yeah,
that, like,
especially when you're starting out, like,
yeah,
you're not going to make a Picasso in a day.
No.
Picasso couldn't make a Picasso in a day. Like, it took him time.
Right, exactly. I mean, hell, the first thing I ever like kit bashed was I added a power sword and a Celestian Sacrosanct shield to a standard Sister of Battle unit so that I could turn it into a Sister Superior, because I had bought, because the thing was, when I was finishing my sister's army, everything I got later was all secondhand models, right? But a lot of those models, because you never know like who's picked up what a lot of times in like used model shops. So the thing that ends up happening is like you end up in a scenario where like there's kind of not a real Sister Superior model here, or like the leader unit. So what do? Well, you just name one as the Sister Superior, and then you use just the bolt gun weapon, and maybe you just say, hey, you can't see it, but the Sister Superior has a chain sword or a power sword or whatever, but I was like, I could have some fun with this because I have extra bits from my Celestian Sacrosanct kit, so let's put them together. I'll carve off the hand from the shield, because the way the kit works is part of the gun and the hand are on the shield, and then you glue it to the arm. Mm-hmm. I just peel all that off, scrape it off with a hobby knife, and then glue it onto the arm with like that I felt like would work with the bolter, and then just fiddled with the other hand to glue the power sword on, and bam, I had a a Sister Superior with a custom looking shield that obviously isn't functional in any way from the game, but it makes it look visually distinct.
Yeah, and that's an interesting.
That was it.
That is an interesting way to start off with the idea of kit bashing, because of your goal. Like, the fact that it's like, as far as what you're trying to do, you're trying to create a model for something that technically exists but just hasn't had a model made for it yet. And I think when newcomers are like first starting out to do kit bashing, I think their impulse is to try to create something entirely new from imagination and just be like, I'm gonna make whatever I can come up with in my head, and then they could have like a dry spell or something where they're just like, I can't think of anything cool to do,
right.
But like having a goal in mind of like, I know of this existing faction or this existing thing, it just doesn't have a model yet, let me see if I can make something close to that with the existing kits that I have. Like, it gives you much more of a clearer goal to work towards.
So like, honestly, with this, there's like a great video done by Hellstorm Wargaming. He's done a couple videos like this, but the one I watched and I am using as a point of reference is the there's way more than 33 Emperor's Children in this army box, which is a video in which he takes the Slanesh army box that came out on launch, and granted, it's not as relevant obviously to new people, but it's a great way to look and learn about how to think about kit bashing, even with something that again already exists, which is, or like something that exists, but you're now doing it in a different way. And what he does is he takes the Slanesh box, and then he grabs one box of the Horus Heresy Mark 6 armor kit, which the Horus Heresy boxes come with 20 Space Marines versus 10. They cost $82, but it's cheaper than buying 2 Space Marine kits. So take that for what you will. But the trick is they are scaled slightly smaller because these are Primaris size Marines, and Primaris Marines got a scale size increase. So, which inevitably led to Chaos Space Marines also getting said scale size increase. But still, the thing about that is that, because they're Horus Heresy kits, they are smaller than the normal Incursor and I forgot the name of the units. But the 2 battle line units for Emperor's Children, they're shorter. And that's the thing, right? Like, because like we talked about with 3D printing, you never want a kit bash or whatever to cheat, right? So, because they're shorter, you could talk, the thing is you have to then create like a platform or something on the base to bring them up to the correct height of the other Space Marines so that you don't get accused of cheating. Because, line of sight is a factor in 40K, right? Like if your head pokes over cover, then you are visible to be shot, So that's kind of where obviously that stuff matters, but that's the thing, right? So now with this video, Hellstorm looks through it and builds, ends up building, I think it ends up being 40 because there's technically, he says 33 models, but there's 20 of this unit that he specifically kit bashes. And you could do it as 10 and 10, 20 for one, 20 for the other, whatever. But he turns that 20 total into 40 total, which is an inherently great value, because then you don't have to buy 2 other boxes. But that's the whole thing. So like, you had to get a source, and you're not like obviously making something crazy new, but like the kit does not normally placate with standard pre-heresy armor. It all placates to the special, Emperor's Children armor that's like unique into their kits. But now what you end up with is, especially depending on the way that you maybe differentiate what arm you swapped with what arm and leg and helmet, a potentially completely unique looking Emperor's Children army compared to somebody who just bought the kit over and over and over again and just built it to instruction. And that's where the glory of this whole shebang comes from. One of the things I kind of wanted to go over is obviously then, what are some of the, like when you're starting to think of the kit bash, what are some of the things that you could do? Because I think it's always good to still maybe get some type of like frame of reference somewhere.
Yeah, certainly.
And obviously I shouldn't say obvious. I always do that. I say obviously when it's like, that's the whole point of me doing this, is that this is not obvious. These episodes exist because this is not an obvious fact. But what could be looked at as a good way to create visualizations of your project is to use some type of like photo editing software, right? Because something that can help give you a visual identity on an idea, you can kind of play with a bit if you have like Photoshop, Canva, or the various free photo editing apps that are out there. PowerPoint works, but obviously like having something that lets you edit and erase it, like Paint, honestly, would work. Because as long as it's something where you can like erase and then move an object, then it's good. That'll work. It's just got to be something that will let you move an object around and then maybe erase parts of it so that you can say you erase everything else except for the arm, and then you put that arm on the arm you've erased from the original model. like it doesn't have to be like super pretty when you look at it, but it's just kind of like that scenario. It's that like scenario where like if you kind of just put it together, this like amalgamation of shapes, you know, and then you just like take the step back and you're just kind of like, yeah, I see it. I got it. You know, that's what matters. It's like if you can just do something to help it shape into what your mind's eye is looking at, then you know you're already like you're on the move.
Yeah, you're just needing a reference point.
And one of the benefits, though, for Gunpla specifically, because while the like whole Photoshop option thing works, obviously this one could be obvious for a lot of Gunpla, which is not why I say it, is if you have probably any of them, but especially you know whatever the newest Gundam Breaker game is, because they'll have the newest kits. You can obviously do any of that kit bashing in the game, obviously provided you've unlocked the models in the store or whatnot, or you've played through the game. But like if you've played through and beaten the game, you can play through you can have a bunch of Gunpla kits that one way or the other may or may, you know, many of them which may exist still, or you could find. And then, you know, you can kit bash in the game. In fact, it was one of the first things that I showed you was like my first like attempt at kit bashing in Gundam Breaker 4.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, there's just like there's almost not even a clear representation, you know, of like how you could kit bash between two models. I wasn't sure if you want to add or how much you've done the kit bashing in Gundam Breaker.
Yeah, it'd be a good time to say so. I mean, I have an impulse to really like take my time with it. Like I'll spend a lot more time just like hanging out with the existing models and keeping them as close to like their usual layout as possible. I think I kind of tend to do that in RPGs anyway. It's a thing where I'll go off of the stats, because obviously with the game like Gundam Breaker, you know, there's also stats attached to your parts and your equipment.
Yeah.
Whereas in real life kit bashing, there are no stats. It's just fun. But yeah, I definitely will like. I want to be familiar with the ins and outs of the existing kits first before I start messing around and going, okay, now let me pull off these arms and swap them for these and like, you know, change out these legs and things like that. Like I'm very much like I will, even if I'm familiar with the process, I'm still going to wait a while with anytime I get a new like kit that I'm dealing with before I actually start messing about with it in that way. And I really like having sets. I don't like the idea of not being able to return back to like whatever it was when it first started out.
Yeah, well, and luckily, obviously, with you know something like Gundam Breaker, you can always just press the, you know, attach all, you know, like attach all pieces of said kit. You know, like
yes, no, there's a ton of options that make it a lot easier to. There's obviously far less commitment with swapping out your parts in something like that.
Right. And I mean, and then even on top of that, you get, there is the section to just literally add bits, you know, like where you can just add like the, you know, this kit has a light fixture bit, you know, and now you can put it on your Gunpla somewhere, you know. If anything, though, I will note it is one thing. It's a menu in the like Gundam Breaker like builder like menu and system, like the creating system, that when you go into like the bits menu and you try to like work them in, it doesn't feel like it's an intuitive menu system. Mm-hmm. So I haven't done the bits much in Gundam Breaker 4 because I've like tried, but like I find like moving the pieces not really easy.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's partly just
I get what you mean.
Me being just like if I'm just dumb or like
No, not at all.
but like I like it's like sometimes I would put the bits on and I'm like, now how do I move it?
Yeah.
Like, can I put it anywhere else? You know, like in real life where I could just be like, all right, super glue here. Now my Gundam has a unicorn horn.
That's definitely something to get into, is just like the whole concept of like, okay, when you're kit bashing, the act itself, you know, how much are you planning to super glue and how much of it is you trying to use I wonder if it is more like of a case with Warhammer that it's like almost more necessary to glue things together as opposed to trying to like make existing pegs and polycaps and that fit into the same place and then just like going with that.
Yeah, it's funky because you know, there's a lot of more kits nowadays that they're getting certain push fit aspects to them, but it's like a twofold or like a two-pronged issue where, you know, it makes it a lot easier to build and you don't need as much glue anymore, but it has also meant that some aspects of kit bashing have become a little bit harder, right? Because with you gotta, the torso now isn't sometimes just a torso, it's a torso and leg combo, you know.
Yeah.
But that it is true though, but with Warhammer has kind of always been a gluing hobby. Like you almost never built with just like even the concept of push fit for anything is entirely pretty new with Warhammer. I think technically they used to, like really old, like back in the beginning, technically I think had some like aspect of push fit, but that was also kind of back when kit bashing wasn't really even an idea, because it was just kind of like all of our models have one pose and it's guy standing with gun to side. You know,
yeah.
Because they're just figuring it out, you know. It was the very beginning. They didn't really like have the full gauge of everything. But, you know, now they've come such a long way. Whereas, you know, gunplay, yeah, as you kind of noted, the differences with with gunplay is that it's always been like essentially like a push fit system. Because obviously they articulate is the big factor.
Yeah, I 100% that, because it's going to depend on your goals and what you want to do for the model after you have finished kit bashing it. Like how badly do you need it to be articulate? Because you might be adding pieces that are like significantly larger or very different shapes from what used to be there, and you can kit bash in a way that it's like, all right, I've made this brand new thing that looks really cool, but now it's like immobile. Like it can't really be articulated in any way.
Yeah, and that's where I think that's where sometimes where maybe the Gundam Breaker could lead you into a land of false promise.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yep.
Because yeah, I mean, you gotta, like, for example, you can put an SD Gundam kit right on a standard Gundam kit, and that's not. I imagine that does not often work very well without glue.
Yeah. Anytime that you're trying to move outside of like the traditional polycap or like male and female connections, you almost will have to end up gluing it, or otherwise like filing down some of your parts to be able to fit in. Because the way they're set up now, you know, it's meant to be that like very specific pegs will go in very specific places, and they want to be able to fit as snugly as possible to mitigate the need for glue. So when you introduce new parts that, if you don't have an identical peg, you know, for example, if it's a larger peg or smaller peg, I mean, you're going to have to modify the existing part of the kit to be able to accommodate that. And so you might have to use creative uses of like putty, filing pieces down so that you have more room to actually work with them. You'll end up doing a lot more modification.
Yeah, and so I mean that's kind of something to talk about too. Is like, I wanted to bring up kind of like what are some of the tools, and obviously then like, what are your ways to finally kind of look at and be like, all right, like here is, here's kind of what you need to be looking for when you're trying to think about, all right, I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start trying to do kit bashing, or honestly just. I have already, or the thing to start thinking about when you start really getting like, when you're on your fourth kit and you're like suddenly like starting to accumulate some sprues here, and I can see that there's stuff left on them. Because that's like one of the earliest things I think some people will do. Maybe not everybody, but I think some people will do is like they'll look at it and they'll see like, oh, like, I built X kit, but then, and you look at it and you're like suddenly like, oh, but I don't want to throw away the sprue because I've got all these pieces left on it, And
yeah,
like,
definitely.
that seems wasteful. And then, then eventually you start learning like, but what and it's like, I could use these later.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, if you're buying kits just to kit bash them together, then you will probably end up with a lot of extra leftover parts like that. And yeah, you definitely got to kind of figure out for yourself if the parts that are remaining, do they have pegs that are going to be able to fit a lot of other models? Are they going to have, is the scale of the parts going to match up with the other model kits that you intend to use? I think on the Gunpla side of things, a very easy tip for getting started is, probably one of the more common questions is which model kits to use to start off with. And usually the recommendation is to stick with high grade. High grade, obviously, because it's going to have, there's less pieces overall. A lot of your pegs and your polycaps are going to be around the same size because the high grades have a very specific scale to them. And also they don't have the like internal skeleton rig that some of the higher end models like the perfect grades and stuff have, which makes it a lot easier to separate out the kit at like the torso level or at the legs and be able to completely swap those out. Whereas with some of those higher grades, you're more so just going to be swapping out the exterior parts on an existing rig that can't really be modified quite as much. So it's good to stick with the high grade, just because it's going to give you a lot more freedom to really, mess around with things.
Yeah, and obviously similarly with 40K, and honestly a lot of the war game type model kits is generally, if especially at the start, sticking within the same faction but using different, just like for example with Space Marines, right? Using bits from like say the sniper and like stealth unit kit, or even honestly the stealth, like a scout squad, even though like they're technically a little bit smaller and less armored, but you want X part of it or Y, whatever, and then, but because they're all Space Marines, it's way easier to kind of get them to be like, all right, I can get this to fit in here,
Definitely.
This arm is going to line up and be a similar size to that arm. That's even the case with the Horus Heresy stuff, right? Like combining a Horus Heresy kit with a Chaos Space Marine or normal Space Marine, and you will still find, even though there's the slight height difference, that all the other scale of the parts don't look weird. Like it's not like the arm is weirdly too like a half size bigger. Like it's not so significant where it's, and that then goes true for the other factions, right? Like so, different Eldari work better with other Eldari because they all have the similar build characteristics, whether they're Drukari or Craft World, you know, or Harlequins. You know, they all still have that similarity. And that you did bring up something though with the putty that I kind of wanted to get into then, which was then some of the tools, or at least like stuff to think about having when you plan to kit bash, because again, you'll kind of start accumulating bits and sprues and whatever, and you start to run into the scenario of like, okay, well, what do I do? You know, like, how do I make sense of this? And the first thing to do by far, especially with like stuff like Warhammer, but even so in Gunpla, is create bits, or like organized bits boxes, like label them, say like, this is my Chaos Space Marine bits box, this is my Sisters of, you know, bits box, this is my Eldar's bits box, and get them all out of the sprue, and then put, you know, heads with heads, arms with arms, legs, you know, whatever, all like categorize them, because essentially like what you want to look for is like the type of boxes you want to look for are those like things like pill organizers, or the like especially craft store kits, like the sewing kit boxes where they'll have like the little compartments in there.
Also the boxes that they sell at a lot of like department hardware stores and tool shops that usually get used for like your hardware, you know, your screws, your nuts and bolts, things like that. Those are also incredibly useful for any kind of hobby like this where you have a bunch of little pieces to organize out.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's like the number one place to go, because nothing will kill a kit bash project faster than choice paralysis. And
you just get overwhelmed.
You know, you just kind of look at a stack of boxes or sprues and you're like, I don't know what I have. Where's anything? You know, it's so much easier when you can just kind of like, you just kind of pull out a box and you just kind of like, you kind of look at it and you're like, I could do something with this arm. You know, like it's what makes you think. Cause that's what I did is like with my Sister Superior was I looked at, you know, it wasn't in a bits box at the time, but I looked at the arm and the shield of a Celestian Sacrosanct model. And I was like, and I looked at my unit that didn't have a proper Sister Superior. And I was like, I have more of these. I could put one on there. And then I looked at the kit and then I'm like, oh yeah. And I've got this, I can just grab this power sword because this power sword doesn't have a hand attached to it. So I can really easily just insert it into the hand of the Sisters model that I was planning on using. Cause it kind of has like a semi open hand as it was. So I was like, oh, that's easy then. All I got to do is plop it in there and bam, I've got it. So like being able to see and what you have, look at a whole thing, and you can kind of then be like, right, okay, I've got it. Like I've got something here.
Yeah. Don't rely on your memory. Don't just try to rely on like your ability to remember which parts were part of which kits, because eventually depending on the number of kits that you do accumulate, you're going to have so many of certain types of body parts and like pieces that it's just going to be so much of a headache to keep track of. And the point of this, as always, is not to make this a headache for yourself. You want it to remain fun, you know?
Exactly. And then, so you mentioned putty. So one of the next things to get is like green stuff is a very commonly used putty, or, you know, whatever, like molding material or whatever you want to call it. You know, because it helps fill in gaps where, you know, like where maybe, for example, your torso piece is like a little weird, or honestly, it's great if you want, say, like the scarf or a cape, and there's not really one in any of the kits. Well, it's like, okay, well, you can kind of create this, you know, you can kind of create one. Or, for example, you want to put texture on something. You know, you can mold the putty together, put a texture roller on it if you have one, or find one, or whatever, anything that could create texture, or you just make it by drawing on it with like a little knife or toothpick, and then just like put it on top of the model wherever you wanted, say, the pattern to be. That like it comes in handy so much, and there's always going to be these points where like the model will not maybe line up properly. Maybe you have less neck space than you thought, right? Maybe you need to make the chest wider because like you're really only working with a front chest piece, but not the back piece, like the back part of the torso. You only have the chest, but not the torso. Well, putting it over putty because if the back, say, is going to be hidden, just putting some putty to give it like a better shape will go a long way, and then it hardens up and it is treated just as hard as any of the plastic or resin that you're using it with.
Are you familiar with the brand Tamiya?
Yeah, I mean, I use their Tamiya and Tamiya's extra thin plastic glue and Warhammer are like butter and sliced bread.
Yeah. Tamiya has a bunch of different options, and there's a few of them that tend to be more used on the Gundam, like the Gunpla side of things. Their basic putty that they put out, it's like the basic type, I think it's called, is a really good all-purpose. I mean, it's really best for like really small gaps, but it can be used for like texturing as well. Like it's a really good just like basic putty to work with.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is a lot of it ends up coming to just how much of it you use, right? Like,
yes.
You could take up you could just get a bunch of putty and just fuse them all together and make something huge and crazy, but like different, there's all these different types for various desires, essentially, like whatever you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the other one is like the polyester putty. So like the basic type is good for small gaps, sure, and like some texturing. And then if you use the polyester, that's a good route to go for like your larger gaps that you're trying to fill in. And it also cuts really nice with like an X-Acto knife or with a hobby blade, which anyone who's working with Gunpla is probably going to end up using some sort of an X-Acto knife or a hobby blade at some point with cutting from the spruces. So
right, yeah. And so then like one of the things then that kind of can coincide with some of the need for that, depending on the scenarios, you can always get a 3D printer to make new bits, whatever it is that you wish to add or create or whatnot, whether it's trying to make more Exodite style Eldari pieces. They don't sell really beaky helmets on their own, but if you want more beaky helmets for your Space Marines, you could always print them, because honestly, even that's kind of even somewhat like the GW like kind of seal of approval way of using a 3D printer in Warhammer is to just make small bits to help customize your army, right? Like they don't, like if you made for example, if you print off a chainsword that has like a big special eagle crest, for whatever army or your chapter you're doing, then they don't really care, because like it's just this sword and it's giving you flair, right? And they're cool with that, because one way or the other you still have to buy the kit you attached it to, so it doesn't hurt their bottom line at that point, and so like that's mainly obviously the reason they don't care, but like that's a classic way to use the 3D printer is if you're like, well, I still want to play or use a lot of the plastic kits because I like the plastic kits that come out. Then it's just like, okay, well, you can use these as a supplement, right? More like special pauldrons, like a weapon that looks a little bit different, still generally the shape of, say, like an Eldari sniper rifle, but it's got this added flair to it, that makes it just a little bit unique. And you're like, this is my craft world uses this type because blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, it helps you add to your lore, to your creativity. Right. And one of the things that having a 3D printer can help with, this is more in the case of a war game, right? Not gunplay as much, is then you will want to keep around extra bases or things that can serve, like whether you just go and buy extra bases, which most game stores and hobby shops will have, otherwise, or like war game based hobby shops. Otherwise, you can always 3D print them. I have like a whole, like I have an STL file where I can just print off like all the various base sizes that have existed in Warhammer and various other war games, whether they're like ovals or circles or squares. It's just like, whenever I need them, I can just print them. And that's obviously incredibly helpful because you're kind of looking at a scenario where you're like, like when I talked about the Hellstorm Wargaming video where, you're kind of, in that scenario, it's benefited because you're getting a kit that comes with bases. But you're in this scenario suddenly maybe where you are in fact combining two kits, but you've already made the models for one, but you're just using a various bunch of bits and you are able to create an entirely unique model out of them. Yeah. Well, now you need a base, like you don't have it anymore. You put it on the original kit you built. So that's kind of where like sometimes then it's good to just always have them around once you start kind of getting into the hobby, or you kind of get into the habit and the idea of kit bashing more and more and more. So like having just like a few standard size for your army, it's just kind of nice to just have around. They're cheap to have, to make, whatever. It's definitely not like the hardest part of the investment here. Mm-hmm. And like I said, that's mostly for wargaming, but I mean that's true for Star Wars Legion. That's gonna be true for Trench Crusade, for Warhammer. That potentially Gundam Assemble. Though because that's going to be like a card based war or like game, I don't necessarily know if that'll. I'll be curious to how kit bashing will work for that when that comes out.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think it'll be really interesting.
Like I'd have to know how well kit bashing goes. Like a good example of a game I know that plays like how Gundam Assemble is working is Warhammer Underworld. But I don't really know much about that game. But it kind of operates off of a similar system, right? Where it's this like hexagonal card-based miniature game. So yeah, we'll have to see, because it would be great if you could kit bash those together and whatnot, more than just like painting them differently or anything. But because those have bases, but normal gunplay doesn't, and so in that scenario, you just you put them on the shelf.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
But yeah, I mean the really I still just like can't emphasize that like just one of the number one thing with kit bashing is to just get that grip on your bits, for every hobby in existence.
I'm sorry.
What? Oh, shut up. Took me. I was like, what do you mean?
No, you're right though. No, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing with every hobby, right? Like no hobby is immune from like you just potentially having just a mountain of bits or sprues that are just completely disorganized.
Tiny,
and then you'll never find anything.
2-dot Lego pieces that you don't really have any use for. Yeah.
And I mean, granted, like there's, like we've mentioned, right? There's glory in the unorganized Lego box, right? Being able to look at the box of Legos that's just this amalgamation of random pieces, and then just kind of pulling them out and just making something out of nothing.
Is that what you were as a kid? Did you have the Lego tub or the giant Lego box?
Absolutely, I had the Lego tub.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say the only times that I actually ever stuck to a kit was anything that was like branded, so like Lego Star Wars, or anything that was maybe like a car, like a car like thing.
Yeah.
But even then, that didn't always last super long. But and then for the most part, again, I mentioned the most part, Bionicle.
You beat me to it. I was waiting. I was building up to talking about how for a certain generation of kids, their first experience with quote unquote kit bashing was probably Bionicle. Because they have a very similar thing of like the pegs and the ball joints and a lot of them having like similar pieces and all being the same scale, so it was really easy to like
how
swap
you
all the
use
parts
the
out.
like gears, like so that you articulate.
The
you can have it
gears
so
were
like
uniform,
maybe both arms move, only one arm moves, but it has a ball joint instead of like the up and down motion.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, it's kind of like the Connects thing I talked about, where like people like found ways to engineer crazy Bionicle builds, and as like 10-year-old children, you know, like. But yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I would always start, and I would always have like my favorite Bionicles as like, this is, you know, my Bionicle kit. But then you'd be like, well, I'll get another one, and then I can build my own custom Bionicle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, I don't need this one to be together. I'll just have, these ones aren't my favorites, so I'll put this together, and then I'll ask for a second, you know, Snow Bionicle. I don't remember any of their names, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Bionicle
How
fans.
dare you forget the names of the Toa, who I also can't name all of them in this exact moment.
Especially because there were the multiple Toa. Well,
yeah.
I think ended up, I think the only character differences were just between the original movie and then everyone that preceded it.
There was a few lines. They did the Power Rangers thing where there was like a few different, you know, teams over the years.
I think honestly it was really just the two, because I think movies 2 and 3. Oh, I guess there was like a later one that like went very under the radar because it got like a very non-release. Like it was like a very kind of just like, we're not really going to tell anybody we're releasing this type release. I forgot there was technically a fourth one. I've never seen it.
Yes.
Listen, I don't think I've watched the third one either. But
I would love to spend this entire episode talking about Bionicle, but we can't do that because one, this is primarily a Warhammer and Gundam show now, and two, it would be unfair to not also mention Galador if we're going to be talking about Lego product lines with action figures with interswappable parts. Okay, it would just be unfair, so we have to move on.
What? Galador? I don't remember that.
You forgot Galador? All my homies from 2002 to 2003 remember Galador.
Oh my god, this thing. I forgot about it. That's
the exact reaction you should have.
And immediately,
that thing. Oh.
Immediately, dude, all of the things on like the beginning of the the Google search are just like these abominations.
Truly awful.
Like
this is where kit bashing goes wrong, because they went in with kit bashing in mind as like this is going to be the core concept.
They made it, but making it very human suddenly makes it very cursed.
Human, and like none of the character designs are like good to begin with. So you're just making freaks. It's just freakazoids.
Yeah, because I remember
look at that John Carpenter nonsense.
Spider is what it was called.
The thing could be anywhere.
The only Galador thing I owned was the McDonald's toy, which is the first hit on the image search. That was the only thing I owned. And I was like, I I was like, it's kind of cool, but I kind of
Yep.
wasn't.
Yep, that's correct.
wasn't super into it.
That's why it was around for 1 year.
Yep, I'll leave this to the side. And I mean, yeah, like it was. You know what? It was an attempt.
It sure was.
It was a thought.
They sure did. But there's an important lesson to be learned from this that kind of caters to this episode, which is, we talked about like what you as a builder kind of want to keep in mind when you're kit bashing. But you got to remember that like a lot of these model kits, for the most part, they're not being made with the idea in mind of like we want people to intentionally kit bash. Like they're more so made, it's like we want this to be as accurate to the design of the character or to the Gundam or to whatever the original thing is as possible. The goal isn't necessarily like we want people to immediately tear these apart and swap around the parts. So you have to kind of keep that in mind with your process and understand that you're gonna have to probably do some work if you really want to have it come out looking nice. It's better to like try to construct it as much as you can, use references like we talked about earlier in the episode, and like really look at it before you start bringing out the super glue, because it's not as easy as it sounds to make something that is going to look really cool when you get to the end result.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, and at that point, you'll notice that like we're not really giving any example. Great, like we're not doing. There'll be visual examples, obviously, but like you've been seeing them in the episode. But
you
we
will see every
like,
Galador figure in 4K detail
in my dreams, my nightmares. We haven't been like, so the thing to start on is, you need to go buy a Space Marine, this Space Marine Lieutenant kit, and then get this other Space Marine Lieutenant kit, and then this third Space Marine Lieutenant kit. All different, by the way. They're not the same kits. Mm-hmm. One is lieutenant with plasma pistol, one is lieutenant agent, one is lieutenant with power fist. They're all different.
This one has kung fu grip.
You know what? That's how it feels like the way that they come out with these Space Marine lieutenant kits. Yeah. That's how it feels. We could for sure take a deeper dive into, the best uses of green stuff or putty, these are good. Like if you want to do this, if you want to create something like this, or if you're at the point where you're bits hunting, go to these kits. We could do an episode like that, but I think it's just beyond the purview of today.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, so that'll be it for this week then. Next week we go back to some Gundam talk.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's right. Like for real Gundam talk, not this half and half shit that we do on these hobby episodes. It's all Gundam next time, baby. And yeah, that'll be we'll have a good time, I think, and we won't spoil it yet, but we're gonna talk. We'll definitely talk some form of like either like of the of animated series, not Gunpla, but the Gundam series.
You know the drill, y'all. He's in. Yeah. He's invested.
We're in.
We're here. It's happening. It's Gundam.
Absolutely. All right. We'll see you next time.
Rest in peace, Galador.
No goodbye. It's just ending on rest in peace, Galador.
No, that'd be disrespectful.